Okay, I think we're going to get started, everyone. Welcome to this presentation by the Irvington Historical Society and the Historical Society of Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown about the milestones of the Albany Post Road. Just to let everyone know, if you could hold your questions to the end, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. As you go along, you can put your questions in the chat, or during the question and answer session, you can also use the raise your hand feature if you want to ask a question. But I'll explain that again when we get to the very end. But I would like to get going, and I'm going to turn this over to Earl Ferguson, who is going to introduce our speakers. So go ahead, Earl. It's off to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Earl Ferguson, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Irvington Historical Society. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to our program today, History and Mystery, the Milestones of the Albany Post Road, being co-presented by...
Could I ask anybody who is not muted to mute themselves, please? Thank you.
I'm pleased to welcome everyone to the program today, History and Mystery, the Milestones of the Albany Post Road, which is being co-presented by the Irvington Historical Society and the Historical Society Incorporated of Sleepy Hollow in Tarrytown. These milestones, which can still be found along Route 9 as it passes through our villages, offers a direct connection to our colonial history. They influenced colonial life on a daily basis, helped Washington navigate the Revolutionary War, and established a sense of place in early America. More importantly, many of them are still here with us today and reflecting the rich history of our villages and the greater Hudson Valley. Our speakers today bring a rich and detailed knowledge about the milestones along the Albany Post Road, their history, and the stories they tell us. Henry Steiner is an author of several books about the history of the Hudson Valley and the longtime village historian of Sleepy Hollow. He has lectured on historical subjects at the City University of New York, the State University of New York, and various local New York schools. He was a regular columnist for the River Journal and is a contributor to the Encyclopedia of the State of New York. Char Weigel is a trustee for the Historical Society of Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown. She taught history and interdisciplinary courses at the Shipley School, located outside of Philadelphia, as well as finance and economic courses at the college and graduate school level for many years. She is actively involved in ongoing research projects on local history. Char and Henry are the co-authors of a wonderful article about the milestones along the Albany Post Road from Dobbs Ferry to Ossining, which was published last year in the Chronicles of the Historical Society of Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown. Please join me in welcoming Char and Henry.
Thank you very much, Earl, for that nice introduction. I'm Henry John Steiner, and I would have to agree with Earl that these post road milestones do provide a direct connection to the rich history of our villages and the greater Hudson Valley. Welcome all to this discussion. Before we get started, Char and I would like to thank all those who contributed to the presentation today and to our published article. Specifically the historical societies of Dobbs Ferry, Irvington, Ossining, Sleepy Hollow, and Tarrytown. We'd also like to thank the New York State Historical Society and the Westchester County Historical Society, as well as the Westchester County Archives. Today's presentation is based on research that Char and I conducted over a fairly long period of time. When we started, I don't think that either of us fully appreciated where we would end up or exactly how long it would take to get there. But I do think that this was an intriguing investigation for both of us, and there were plenty of unexpected revelations to keep us interested along the way. Milestones are like hash marks on a yardstick, but when you find a milestone and there's no other milestone for a mile in any direction from it, it leaves you with just a pile of questions. You might ask yourself, where does this yardstick really begin? Years ago, when I was a boy growing up in Tarrytown, I became aware of the milestone that stands next to the south gate of the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. It's right near the path that leads up to the ancient Old Dutch Church of Sleepy Hollow. The milestone was and is very easily seen. It's right out in the open, and quite a few people go by it. Some people pass it traveling in and out of the cemetery gate, either on foot or in their cars. Other people pass it going to services at the Old Dutch Church or walking up the hillside to browse in the Old Dutch burying ground, or even beyond that, ascending even further up the hill to see the grave of Washington Irving. The first time I really looked at the milestone, I'm sure I asked myself, 28 miles from New York, really? And later I would have thought, New York's a big place. Where exactly are we talking about in New York? The milestone looked old to me then, but I had absolutely, at that time, no idea how old it might be. It was only later that I attempted to try and bring some order to the question of the local milestones in my own mind, sort of the way that you might try to bring order to a room in your house. So if the house is what we call local history, then this was the milestone room. During the mid-1990s, my research took me up to the Ossining Historical Society to see what they had on the subject. Just after I walked through the door, I made a major discovery. Her name was Roberta. Roberta Arminio was the paragon of the Ossining Historical Society in those days. She was the executive director, and she was also the village and town historian of Ossining. Roberta sat at a desk in a cloud of cigarette smoke swirling about her. And from this position, it seemed to me like she could lay her hands on anything somebody asked for. Within a few minutes, she was able to provide me with a typed information sheet on the Albany Post Road milestones specific to Ossining. It included a very helpful piece of information that I had not encountered elsewhere, namely that the milestones were originally placed on the west side of the post road. If true, that meant that a milestone on the east side was either relocated or that the road itself had been rerouted. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that a milestone you find on the west side of Route 9 is in the right place. Roberta Arminio passed away in 2010, but I continue to be grateful for the assistance that she was able to give me. Based on the work that I did with historic maps and surveys and field measurements that I took with the odometer of my car, I produced my findings to date. They appeared in a book I published in 1998 titled The Place Names of Historic Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown. The main problem with that interpretation of the milestones was the milestone I had selected to serve as my so-called keystone. Based on a somewhat educated assumption, I chose the Mercy College milestone, milestone 26, to serve as my keystone, not milestone 27. The Mercy milestone had been moved slightly in the late 20th century. This meant that my calculations were slightly off. I did not realize this until Char Weigel and I started working together, and she pointed out to me that my beloved keystone was not the keystone at all. Char and I met at the Historical Society serving Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown just a few years ago. Char was a new face at the society and happened to be on hand when I was there looking for information on the old silver shoe factory in Tarrytown. Knowing how slow and arduous this research process can be for even someone very experienced in the local sources, I was really impressed when Char seemed to effortlessly pull the information I needed out of the air. Though Char was relatively new to the society, she had considerable experience at serious historical research and a substantial knowledge of history. I think she asked if I had a project that she could assist on. And it occurred to me then that there was unfinished business to be done on the milestones that I had studied over 20 years earlier. Char agreed to sign up for that effort, and before I knew it, I had a very talented collaborator. She led the way, expanding the modest outlines of my own preliminary investigations on this subject. Incidentally, as mentioned earlier, a complete discussion of our findings has been published by the Historical Society serving Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown in 2020. It appears in the Society's publication, The Chronicle, and the piece is accompanied by a list of sources. Copies are available at the Society at 1 Grove Street in Tarrytown. Just some general notes about our talk. It appears to us that the course of Route 9 is relatively faithful to the course of the Albany Post Road between Dobbs Ferry and Ossining at the time that the milestones were originally installed in the 18th century. Two exceptions that we know of are the Pecanico River crossing at Sleepy Hollow. Robert Erskine, in the period of the Revolutionary War, showed that crossing was about 75 yards further upstream up the Pecanico River from today's Route 9, from today's Route 9 crossing of the stream on Route 9. On his survey map, he shows a long S-curve deviation from the course that Route 9 takes today. There's a second variation, also shown on Erskine's maps and surveys of the Revolutionary period. It is a relatively short section of the Colonial Post Road between Warner Library in Tarrytown and the Post Road intersection with Bedford Road in Sleepy Hollow. That's Route 448. This is a section where the historic Post Road swept up the hillside in a path more or less parallel to today's Broadway or Route 9. Finally, it should be noted that there is a long-standing tradition in the Ossining-Sparta area that the Albany Post Road originally followed the path of today's Revolutionary Road and was later rerouted to its current course along Route 9. That's the local lore on this theoretical deviation. And that would have taken the Albany Post Road right by the Jug Tavern at Sparta. After carefully investigating this idea, we have found that the evidence does not appear to support the Revolutionary Road detour theory. In fact, the historical map evidence appears to rule it out. At this point, I'd like to hand off things to my colleague, Char Weigel. Char?
Thank you, Henry. Hello, everybody. It's great to be with so many people that really have a passion for local history, something I think we all have in common. So I wanted to start the presentation by just talking a little bit about our sources. Henry just said something kind of provocative, that the local lore in Ossining is something that we have some evidence to suggest something else. And you're going to hear a few other myths about milestones that we're going to provide some information on that suggests otherwise. So in order to do that with credibility, we need to share with you, okay, so where do we get our sources from? You all are probably familiar, but just to introduce the terminology, primary and secondary sources, historians look at both types of sources. A primary source is one that was created very close to the event. Sometimes it's a first-person account. It might be a photograph, a diary, a letter. Secondary sources are with some distance removed from the event. And both sources have merit, but also both sources have problems. And a primary source is just one point of view. And it has bias, as all sources do, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, and ditto for secondary sources. So Henry and I really focused quite a bit on trying to find primary source information about the milestones in our area. And I'll share with you some of the places where we found that, and you can judge for yourself if our arguments are compelling. Now, Henry also mentioned legends and lore and stories that are kind of whispered down the lane. And sometimes those stories are correct, but a lot of times they get a little transformed in the telling. Sarah Masha and I, Sarah is the executive director of the Historical Society of Sleepy Hollow in Tarrytown. We recently did a presentation at Warner Library reclaiming the stories of two Black residents of the area, a man enslaved by the Phillips family, whose name was actually Harry, but through the years, the story had been transformed to attribute his story to someone named Cuffy, and a woman who moved to Tarrytown after being enslaved in Virginia and New Orleans. Her name is Laura Taylor, and her story had been attributed to a woman by the name of Mary Taylor, or a different name by the name of Mary Taylor. So we have to proceed very cautiously when we hear hearsay, and we want to find out if we can find evidence to back it up. Now, having said that, I do want to distinguish that there is a strong oral history tradition among Indigenous people that is a very valid source of history. Within the Indigenous people, often you have stories passed down through hundreds, if not thousands of years that are memorized from elders to children. And this is the history of a people that didn't necessarily have a written language, but had an oral history tradition. The Haudenosaunee are not people from our area. We live on the land of the Lenni Lenape and the Munsee culture. But I just wanted to show you this wampum belt because I was able to take it directly from an Indigenous people's website, the Onondaga Nation. Wampum belts embedded some of the oral tradition, and they would have been kind of teaching aids, if you were, that were augmented for oral history. So we very much take oral history from Indigenous people as a valid source of history, questioning the hearsay piece of it that is more common to us. I also want to show you a map, a different kind of map. We're going to look at a lot of maps today. This is a really cool map because, and maybe some of you know this river in Maine, the Penobscot River. The Penobscot Nation, again, an Indigenous people who have an oral history tradition, recently engaged with some contemporary artists to create a map that shows their oral history tradition of navigating the Penobscot River. And I just wanted to show you this to point out up front that whatever goes into a map is a reflection of the bias of the map maker and the culture of that map maker. So here, the Penobscot people, if they're going to offer, as they do, a map of the Penobscot River, you're going to see areas that the entire community would participate in identified. Here is the place where we catch the eels. Here is the place where the river changes flow and direction. The maps we're going to look at today are colonial maps, 18th, 19th, and even maybe some 20th century maps if we get into that in the Q&A. They reflect generally a few biases. They are created generally to show ownership or to show areas of governance, or in the case of Robert Erskine that Henry mentioned, that's a military topographical map that was used for military maneuvers. So we're going to take a look at all of them as evidence for the claims we're going to make to you today. So first I wanted to show you this really cool map. Some of you may have seen it. And listen carefully here, because this is an 1880 map by M.K. Cousins that is based upon a 1785 map by John Hills that was used by the Commissioners of Forfeiture. And it was annotated in the 20th century by Paul Borquin at the Westchester Historical Society and Archives. And this is a map of the tenant farmers in Philipsburg Manor. So the section I'm showing you here, you can see Irvington at the bottom, which is a contemporary reference that Borquin added, because obviously we wouldn't have seen Irvington at the time of the Revolutionary War. Here's Tarrytown, which was here. And these areas in here show the names of the tenant farmers who were in place at the time the Commissioners of Forfeiture began to sell off the land seized from the Phillips family after they had been arrested for treason, they had been charged with treason and fled to England. So this land was seized and sold off to pay the state of New York's war debts. The tenant farmers who were in place at the time, as long as they could prove they were not a loyalist, had first dibs at buying the farm that they had for 4 or 5 generations, many of them, most of them, farmed in their family. So this is an amazing map. However, it was not helpful to us. And the reason is because you won't find a milestone anywhere on this map. So why would that be? We had a particular challenge in researching the milestones in the area that we focused on, Dobbs Ferry to Ossining, which is generally the area of Philipsburg Manor, recognizing Philipsburg Manor also includes Yonkers. We just didn't go down that far in our research because the leaseholds, the right to farm these lands as tenants, was what was inherited. There was very little property that was actually sold by the Phillips family. Unlike the rest of the manors in Westchester, there was a lot of sale of property there. And when a property is sold, the deed often indicates if there's a milestone nearby, it will place that milestone so that the property can be identified. We didn't really have any of that happening during the colonial era in Philipsburg Manor. So that presented a real challenge for us. However, we did find a number of really helpful maps. On the left here, you see a segment of Robert Erskine map that Henry mentioned. Erskine, and then after him, after he passed away, Simeon DeWitt, were the cartographers for George Washington. And their purpose in drawing these maps was to help Washington and his officers and the troops maneuver through this area, which many of them, even though we had some really important local guides, many of the troops, of course, would not, or the officers have known the area well. Erskine did include mention of Milestone on some of his sketches and on his kind of summary map, and we'll show you that. Here's another map. This one is from 1789. Christopher Collis, we've heard his name different ways. He was very entrepreneurial. At the end of the American Revolution, he thought, well, everyone's going to want to hit the road and find what is this country we now have and travel around. So he created maps with an intent to help travelers. So the landmarks that he includes on his maps are things like inns, blacksmith shops in case your horse throws a shoe, churches, and in some cases, milestones. So we'll show you some important maps that helped us that Collis had. And finally, not finally, but another map we wanted to highlight. This is an 1810 map that was created of the Albany Post Road between New York City and Albany around the time that the Albany Post Road was going to briefly become the Highland Turnpike. And that map was very helpful to us as well because many of the milestones were indicated on that map. So those are 3 maps you'll be seeing a little bit more of, but it wasn't just maps that we used as primary sources. We also used letters, the town book of Philipsburg Manor that dates to, I think, 1742, the road commissioner's book of the area that was from the early 1700s. This is an example of some minutes from the Common Council, 1769, City of New York, where you can see the council ordered George Lindsay some money to actually put in place 16 milestones within the boundaries of New York City. So there's a number of primary sources in addition to maps that we use, but we're really going to focus mostly on the maps here because they're so visual for this presentation. So I want to turn this back to Henry, and he's going to introduce you to the first milestone we're going to highlight today.
Thank you, Char. That was really good. I learned a lot in that presentation. Let's see. I think I'd like to introduce milestone 27 in Irvington before we run the video on it. We call this milestone the keystone. Historically, it has been a very easy milestone to overlook. But in our study, it has emerged with renewed importance as a measure for other milestones and other milestone sites. So if you will, Char, let's run the video.
Okay.
Milestone 27 in Irvington. And Milestone 27 is what has become known by Char and myself as the keystone, and we'll explain why that is so. It's located very close to the intersection between Harriman Road and the Albany Post Road, or 89 Broadway in Irvington. And it's in the vicinity of other landmarks, nearby landmarks like the Odell Tavern and the Barney Brook. It's situated on the west side of the Albany Post Road. And our research shows that that's pretty much where all of these milestones started out, on the west side. So if you find a milestone on the east side, there's reason to take pause and reconsider whether it's in the right place. Milestone 27 became an important landmark for us in our research because it is clearly marked with a legible number. And unlike other milestones that are found along the Albany Post Road, this milestone appears to be in the right place. Milestone 27 tends to hide in plain sight. It is camouflaged by the long stone wall which surrounds it. So that makes it very easy to miss, even if you're walking slowly by it, until this mile marker plaque has made it a little easier to find. It also has a different appearance in color and shape from other milestones that are still standing along this longer stretch of the Albany Post Road. So we've just taken a closer look at milestone 27, the keystone. It is a significant milestone because it allows us to measure off to the north and to the south the relationship with other milestone sites that we're looking for. And this helps us interpret the milestones of the Albany Post Road.
Great. So, so this is a nice open shot, an open close-up of the milestone as it looked about 2 years ago. The small squarish stone that you see right on top of the milestone has been removed, and the wall is now topped with that new metal plaque, making the milestone easier to notice as you go by. So now we're going to look at the 1810 map. And there it is. And bear with me for just a moment. The 1810 map shows the milestone's relationship to other landmarks. You can see the tavern and farmhouse of Jonathan Odell near the center of the image. Above that is Barney Brook, and still higher up or further north, we see milestone 27 on the map. The map of 1810 was made to show the distance of each milestone from Albany, the state capital, rather than from City Hall in New York City. That explains why the mile numbers on this map are so much higher than what we would normally expect on the stones themselves. So let's go back to Char now with a discussion of a different milestone.
Thank you, Henry. So this milestone, I'm going to introduce the concept of miles site. Milestone 28 at mile site 31 is a very mysterious milestone, and I want to bring you there. So let's take a look at where this milestone is.
So we're here outside the gates of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and down a little bit from the Old Dutch Church burying ground to talk about what may be the most mysterious milestone that we'll be speaking about today. This little guy here, when I do my walking tours for the Historical Society, people often ask me if this is a gravestone, and I get that. You can tell from the shape. And it's of the beautiful red sandstone that a lot of the older gravestones in the burying ground are carved out of. In fact, we have two master carvers who did that work in the 18th century in the burying ground, and one of them, John Zuricher, actually was commissioned to carve some milestones. We don't know for sure if he actually carved this one or not. But things start to get weird pretty quickly with this little guy. One thing that you're going to have to trust me on, and we'll show you some pictures, is that the number 28 is at the bottom of the stone. Nowhere else in any stone that we've seen is the number at the bottom. Take a look here at the top too. It looks like it's really suffered some damage up top. So we really may have a milestone on our hand in Sleepy Hollow that is possibly missing a head. One thing we can probably tell though is that there used to be a number at the very top. And if I push my pun, you may see the ghost of a number if you look really hard. And we're going to give you some clues as to what number that might be when we're back on Zoom. Another problem that we have with the stone is it's in the wrong place. It's hanging out here on the east side of the Albany Post Road when the milestones would have been on the west side. This area has undergone a ton of road work through the centuries, most notably when the Albany Post Road was grabbed and pulled down from where it crossed upstream in the Mechanico to straighten out an S-curve here. So it may have been moved at some point, and we do have a theory about when that was, which we can also share with you. Finally, I'm gonna get myself in trouble now with my Sleepy Hollow neighbors, but this beloved stone is probably the wrong stone for this location. The number 28 is just not the right number. So we'll go back and give you some primary source evidence as to why we think that when we're back on Zoom, and I'll see you there.
Hi, I'm back. So let's take a look at Erskine's map. And I'm going to make a strong statement that math worked the same way back in the colonial era that it works today. So here we go at milestone 27. Here's the Odell Tavern Henry mentioned. So just to orient you, this is the milestone that has been landmarked in Irvington with the plaque. As we head up north, the next milestone would be 28, right? But I just told you the 28 milestone is at outside the gates for Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and the Old Dutch Church burying ground. But just to show you where this 28 is, this is Sunnyside Lane in here where Irving was, Jacob Van Tassel, Wolfert's Roost. That's about where the 28 milestone would have been. If we keep heading up north, just so you can pick up, here's 28, now we're heading up. This is milestone 29. It is, I can share with you a little bit later, but there's no evidence of milestone 29 anymore in terms of where it would have been. But if you think in terms of the, the shopping plaza, that's right there by where the bridge is. It's about where that location would be. As we keep heading up north toward Tarrytown, you do not see on Erskine's map a milestone on this particular sketch. This is sketch 59, I believe. You don't see a milestone designation in Tarrytown. He also doesn't have one at the Old Dutch Church, but he picks up here. So this would be 30, 31, and he picks up with 32. And Henry's going to talk to you about milestone 32 in a couple minutes. So this is why we started to introduce the terminology of mile site. So this where I just showed you milestone 38 lives today would be what we would expect to be mile site 31. I can also show you on Cola's map, remember this is the 1789 map, he has kind of a triptych going on here as he shows our local area. But if I head down here, you can see Tarrytown. He actually does show the 30 milestone in Tarrytown. If you know where McKeel is, or Mackheel, if you lived here a long time ago, you would have said it that way. It was on the west side of the road, kind of opposite there. Heading north, it's kind of maddening. Look at where the map splits right before we get to the Old Dutch Church. But this little star sign here is Cola's key, his legend for a church. So we know that's the Old Dutch Church there. And you can see he clearly marks the 31 milestone next to it. Here's 32, 33, and so on. And we can talk a little bit about some of his map evidence up getting closer to Ossining. And then this is just a little bit of blow up. So you can see the Cola's map where the 30 milestone would have been. Cohenhoven Inn, where that's on the Leftress restaurant there on the northwest corner of Main Street, where the Van Tassel Inn would have been across the road. And then you see a little bit of a close-up here of what Colas offered us for the Old Dutch Church location being mile site 31. And then here is a blow-up of the local area from the 1810 map. And this map, all of the milestones are indicated on the west side of the road, and placement on either side of the road was pretty precise on this map. So that's another indication that gives us a good sense of where mile site 31 would be, where we would have expected to see milestone 31. But today we have milestone 28. So here is a picture that's pretty close in time to now. You can see the 28 just peeking up above the grass there, but we promised you a better shot so you could really see the 28. So this is from William Owen's 1960 book. You can see the deterioration that has occurred, which is something we can talk about in the Q&A if you'd like. But very, very clearly you can see that it is marked as milestone 28. So we have a couple theories about why this stone would be here and marked as 28. We can kind of go into that in the Q&A if you are interested. But I do want to kind of continue with this overview and turn it back to Henry to give you a sense of the milestones a little bit further north.
Thank you, Char. That was very good. So if milestone 28 stands roughly where the milestone 31 site would be, that implies that milestone 32, the next milestone, will be roughly 1 mile north of the Old Dutch Church. However, there's no milestone anywhere near that point today. This is not terribly surprising, given that all 3 milestone sites in the village of Tarrytown are missing their milestones. Our calculations show that milestone 32 should be on Route 9 near the north end of Sleepy Hollow Manor, not far from the entrance to the Rockefeller Cemetery. Rockefeller Cemetery is just north of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery on the same side of Route 9. The Erskine map of the Revolutionary War period confirms this location and the number of the milestone. That is also confirmed by the 1810 map. If we proceed a mile north from there, we arrive virtually at the footbridge of the old Croton Aqueduct Trail, where it crosses over Route 9. But now for just a moment, we've got to back up slightly. About 1/10 of a mile back, we passed a milestone on the west side of the road. It sits within a stone wall near the gatehouse of Rockwood Hall, the old estate of William Rockefeller, right on Route 9. And this may be an instance where a milestone is on the correct side of the road, the west side of the road, but in the wrong place. This is a milestone made of red sandstone. It is worn and encrusted with lichen. The legible number, a legible number cannot be made out on it. If we could make out a number 33 on it, it would be very easy to assume that this stone somehow made its way 1/10 of a mile south from the number 33 milestone site further up the road, where that footbridge crosses over Route 9. All right, so as we proceed north, the next milestone site would be number 34. We calculate this to be just north of today's Clearview School and about 1/10 of a mile south of Scarborough Road. The map most helpful to us in establishing this as a post-revolutionary is a post-revolutionary map by engineer Christopher Collis that Char referred to earlier. There is no milestone 34 to be found in the vicinity or anywhere else that we know of. The Erskine map is also supportive of what the Christopher Collis map shows us about this site. Because we have limited time today, we have to abbreviate my summary of these northern milestones a little bit. But I would like to quickly observe that Char and I believe the next milestone, milestone 35, was located at the corner of Route 9 and its northern intersection with Revolutionary Road in Scarborough. As mentioned earlier, there is a tradition in local lore maintaining that Revolutionary Road was the approximate path of the Albany Post Road and took travelers toward Sparta and the Jug Tavern. That tradition suggests that the road then curved back to the east to rejoin today's Route 9. We have found that there is good period evidence to support a contrary interpretation, that the Albany Post Road continued on its merry way north without the detour to Sparta and the Jug Tavern. The final milestone and milestone site that we looked at closely was the number 36 milestone site. This would appear to have been located at the intersection of Route 9 and Church Street, more or less in the middle of downtown Ossining. There is a stone on the east side. I'm sorry, there is a stone on the east side of Route 9 right across from this point, but instead of being milestone 36, it is numbered milestone 31, the number of the missing stone at the Old Dutch Church of Sleepy Hollow. So that stone is embedded in a wall right in front of Ossining High School, right on Route 9, a retaining wall. This, of course, is food for thought. And I will admit that Char and I have spent a lot of hours discussing this particular milestone and milestone site. Some of that discussion is included in our published article on this subject. Now I'd like to hand it back to Char.
Thank you, Henry. A very concise summary. We are focusing on the milestones that are in the Irvington and the Sleepy Hollow Tarrytown area for this talk because that's the societies that are sponsoring it. But we do have some maps and images of the milestones that Henry just mentioned in case our Q&A takes us down that way. So I want to go back down south to another milestone that has been moved slightly. Some of you may be familiar with this. It was the cover shot for our promotional material. This is milestone 26, and it is on the land of Mercy College. I think I have a close-up. Yeah, so there's a close-up. You can really make out the 26 here. It'd be interesting to see, sometimes when you're looking at these images projected this way, some of you may be actually picking up some numbers. Every time you look, it's kind of a little different, but in the right light, you can definitely see that this is the 26th milestone. So it's in approximately the right place, but this is a milestone that has moved. And in order to tell you about this milestone, I have to talk to you about a woman kind of like Roberta Arminio that Henry mentioned, someone that I would really like to have met, Roberta. There's another person I really would like to have met, and it is Sister Mary Agnes Perel. And in the chat, you guys can correct me if I'm saying her name wrong, because I've never actually heard it pronounced. But she was an amazing historian and on the faculty of Mercy College, and she took a great interest in the area, but in particular the milestones. And we have some letters from Sister Perel that really give us the information on this particular milestone. So in 1976, Mercy made the decision to create a wider entrance into the college, the entrance that we see today. And in order to do that, this milestone, which had been sitting to the south side of the entrance to Mercy College, embedded in a stone wall, had to be moved. And arrangements were made for the construction, which occurred in 1977, to take care of this milestone. But one night, Sister Perel got a call from the police chief of Irvington, who told her that he had her milestone. And she had no idea that this milestone that was really precious to her had gone missing. And apparently, during the construction, it had been kind of unseated and thrown into Route 9, and a passerby picked it up, and you can see the crack in it here, right? Like it had been broken, and the police chief and Sister Perel never really revealed who it was that found it, but Sister insisted immediately that the milestone be returned, and the police chief facilitated that. And I just love this quote that she wrote in that letter about this milestone. She said, "The lovely trees that were there in Ardsley Country Club days are no more. But so long as number 26 stands out brave and strong, I'm happy." So Mercy College encased the milestone in a bit of the wall in which it was just to the south of this entrance. Now, I have I want you to see, this is the letter and Sister Perel's signature. But I actually have a little bit of breaking news here. And last night, I got an email, and Robin, who we had talked to at the Dobbs Ferry Historical Society looking for evidence of the milestones, as Henry mentioned, we really thank all the historical societies that worked with us on this. She found this picture of the 26 milestone. You can see it in the original wall. Notice it doesn't have the crack in it. And the wall was, we have it on our maps, it was to the south of the current entrance. We probably would say this was in Dobbs Ferry, not Irvington, but now it's clearly in Irvington, and we're going to leave it up to you all to sort out whose milestone it is, but I think you've agreed to share it. But it is an amazing story of a milestone that was damaged, lost, and then recovered. And I just wanted to go back then to milestone 28. Just like Sister Perel, I think we all have our own milestone stories, and I'm hoping that we can hear some of yours when we get to the Q&A. I just wanted to tell you, some of you may know my husband's name is Miles, and when he saw this milestone the first time, he's like, "Wow, Char, look at that. Miles from New York," and he was only 28, you know. So yes, these look like gravestones, and they're not, but there's quite a bit of information that is buried about them. Information that we have done some work on here, progressed it to a certain point. We're still doing some work on it, but I do want to tell you one of the reasons why I think these milestones are so important to us and so precious. A couple years ago, we at the Historical Society worked with the village of Tarrytown and a number of concerned citizens to landmark the house that's at 740 South Broadway. Now it's known as the Acker-Forkel House. And Stephen Acker was a tenant farmer. He was not a wealthy man. Most of what comes down to us through history, Philipsburg Manor, Lyndhurst, are the homes of people who were very wealthy, are the artifacts of the wealthy. But here we had a tenant farmer's house, an average person's house in Philipsburg Manor. And I think that that is a little bit akin to these milestones. These are monuments that would have been seen by George Washington, by Lafayette, by Hamilton, but also by the tenant farmer, Stephen Acker, and by you and me. And these are kind of monuments that are accessible to all of us and are respected by the average person like us today. So I wanted to just close our remarks there. We're eager to get to talk to you in the Q&A and see what interests you. We have some information on some of the things we've alluded to in the talk, but I know Chet wants to come in and sort of remind people about how we're going to handle the Q&A.
Thanks, Char.
Char and Henry, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We're now going to open it up to questions and answers. As I said at the beginning, you can put your question in the chat. And I think we already have a number of questions in the chat that maybe Henry and Char want to start with. But you can also raise your hand or put it in the Q. I guess actually put it in the Q&A. There should be a Q&A button on your screen as well. And we already have one question in the Q&A from Gail. So I'm going to turn it back to Henry and Char and take it away.
Take it away, Char.
Okay, so I'm looking, Gail will take your question. It says, could the 7 on milestone 37 be the European way of writing the 1? I wonder, Gail, if you're thinking about 27 that we showed you, or actually milestone 37, or even milestone 31. If you want to kind of tell us which milestone, because we didn't actually look a lot at milestone 37 per se. It's a little bit further north than us. But I do, and I will go to what Henry mentioned before. Let me show you a picture of the milestone that is 31 that he mentioned. Don't get dizzy. I'm going through. Here we go. This is milestone 31. It is the one that's embedded in the wall at Ossining High School. Henry mentioned this. And Gail, if you were asking about this, you picked up on something that's really plausible, because that is a very weird looking one, isn't it? It doesn't look like the ones that we would see in other places. So there is a theory that this was carved in later. So could it be milestone 31 that belongs back at Milestone 31 in Sleepy Hollow? Maybe. Could it be milestone 31 that was a 31 that was carved in here? It's very difficult to tell, but we will acknowledge that we haven't seen a one carved that way on other local milestones. I don't know, Henry, do you want to add anything to talk about this
Well,
particular milestone?
only the shard that we have, there's a story about how this stone got there. And we've included that in our published piece. So that's the longer form story of how this particular stone, there is some documentation going back, was it the 1920s, Char? I can't recall now. It was
Yeah, well, early 20th century, yeah,
early
a
20th
couple of
century.
times.
And it started out on the other side of the street. It actually started out over near Church Street, I believe, and then made its way over to this side. So that's an interesting, there's more interesting information about this to be had on this one.
So, Kathy, hi Kathy, you're asking, was the mile marker moved due to the development on the west side of the road and also the lowering of the road in front of the old Dutch church area? Yeah, we think so, right? And I can show you, let's see here if I get out of chat. I'm sorry, getting you a little dizzy here. Whoops, I went the wrong way actually. We have some evidence. This is an awesome map that was basically a real estate sales map for when Stephen Beekman, the son of Gerard Beekman, after Gerard had died, Stephen and his mom Cornelia, who's a story in and of herself, they were selling off the land where Philipsburg Manor is today. And if you look where the arrow shows, if you see the word stone, and then here's mile, and then here's 20, but it's a really weird zero, right? And it is inconclusive to us because there's a lot of numbers everywhere in these kind of maps. They're measuring out different places. Here's a 120, they're all over. So it's not quite clear if this actually says it's definitely not the 20th milestone, whether it was the 28 and the bottom of the 8 was dropped off. But we do know from the deed at the time of sale that identifies the 28 milestone in a couple of different places there. So we know the 28 milestone at that point in time was on the west side of the road. It has since been moved over to the east side of the road. And as Henry mentioned, and as you're talking about, Kathy, the crossing point for the old Albany Post Road was further up to Pecanico. That was pulled down. When the old Croton Aqueduct was put in, the entire Albany Post Road was swung down to the west, as Henry talked about. So there have been a lot of changes here. And that milestone, or at least the site, has been moved related to a lot of the construction. Henry, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly why in colonial times the crossing was further upstream. It was more or less on a line with the back of the church, from what I understand, from my own research. And basically it snaked on down through where the cemetery gate, south gate is today, and then turned up again to the north on the post road as we know it today. So maybe it was upstream previously because that was just a more convenient, less flooded site, because that mill pond that you see on the bottom of the screen, that you see just the top of the mill pond there, I'm sure it expanded and contracted a good deal over time. And then you'll remember from the legend of Sleepy Hollow that Ichabod Crane was led the choir in the old Dutch church. And Irving says that he had kind of a quavering voice that could be heard clear across the mill pond. So that was one of the absurd characteristics of Ichabod Crane. And that's the pond mentioned in the story.
Yeah, and I like what Jean says in the chat. Maybe the Milestones were moved as a prank back in the day.
Right. Yeah,
You
there
know,
you go.
who knows, right? I wanted to take a look. Chet has a question, which I appreciate, Henry and I appreciate. Should there be an effort to clean the milestones to make them easier to see? Henry, do you want to comment on that?
I'm going to let you handle that one.
Oh,
Char.
okay. Well, it is really tempting, right? Like when I was young, people did rubbings of gravestones, right? And that was considered to be really a way of getting kind of a souvenir that we thought was respectful. But we now know that the worst thing you can do to a red sandstone gravestone, as has happened in the Old Dutch Church burying ground and around us, or to these milestones, is to try to put a rubbing, take a rubbing from them, to try to clean them. Like, we were really happy. Of course, Irvington, you didn't do that when you put the plaque up on our keystone, Milestone 27. It's still got the lichen growing there. It looks like it's dirty, but if you touch it to try to clean it up, we're going to lose the surface of those red sandstones. So these milestones have to be carefully preserved in place and definitely not cleaned up. So, I think, do we have a hand raised here too? Let me just see here.
I think there's some
Jeffrey
other
Wilson,
additional
you
questions
raised-
in the chat.
Yeah, there's other questions that are also in the Q&A as well as the chat, which is perfectly fine. Chet, can you call in Jeffrey Wilson? He's raised a hand. I think he wants to voice a question.
Okay, let me see if I can. Give me 1 second. I have to find him. Why don't you keep going? I'm going to look
Okay,
for him.
that would be
Right.
good, because I'm looking at several questions, and Henry, you can take this one. Several questions in the Q&A and in the chat are saying, well, like 27 miles from where? Like, what were they measured from?
Right,
What was
right.
the place?
Well, the original, when the milestones were originally set in the late 18th century, the point of departure was the City Hall of the City of New York. So that was the old City Hall that they measured from. Then sometime in the early 19th century, a new City Hall was built. And so the milestones in Manhattan were relayed to reflect the new geographic location of the City Hall. However, it does not appear that the ones in Westchester County were relocated. So, so basically, they still refer to the old downtown City Hall in New York. So that answered my youthful question of, 28 miles from where, right? So that's where they were measuring from. That's the end of the yardstick, City Hall, the old City Hall. So, and so basically but exactly what course the Post Road took as it ascended into Westchester from Manhattan and so on may have changed. So exactly how they measured that, I'm not clear on. But we do have certain points within the stretch in our own communities, particularly Milestone 27, my cherished keystone, and that will help us to locate other stones.
Char, I'm going to let Jeff speak. Jeff, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff.
Jeff, you're muted. You have to unmute.
How's that?
That's good.
Good. Okay. My question is, I read the plaque on top of Milestone 26 yesterday, and it said that the purpose of these stones, that they were laid by Benjamin Franklin as when he was Postmaster General to determine postal rates. Is that their sole purpose? Do you have more info on that?
So we do. So Benjamin Franklin definitely cared about these milestones. When he became the deputy postmaster general during the colonial period, he inherited a, I don't want to say insolvent, but a postage process and system that was not very self-supporting and certainly wasn't throwing off much money to pay him and his co-deputy postmaster. So he did major efficiency work and converted the way postage was charged. He did a tour of the post roads up and down the colonies. But it's not really, I mean, we can show you some evidence that we would say it's unlikely that while Franklin himself cared about these markers very much, very unlikely that he actually laid any of them. And I think that the marker itself doesn't necessarily claim that he put that milestone there. This is a quote from one of the real authorities on, let me just move my stuff here so I can read it to you. This is Dr. Leonard Laborie. He was the editor at the time of Benjamin Franklin's papers at Yale University. These papers are actually digitized and accessible online, but Laborie, he was the editor for multiple volumes of the papers that he annotated with notes. And if you get, I think it's volume 10, you will find his notes about Franklin, and he was often questioned about whether Franklin himself laid any of the milestones. Now, you can't prove a negative, but he said that that there really isn't any evidence that Franklin himself measured out the milestones or laid them, that the deputy postmaster generals, they were definitely responsible for the routes. But we do know, and if you remember during the presentation, I showed you the primary source for the city of New York putting those milestones in place. Within the legs of the Albany Post Road, there were people responsible for maintenance of the road, and they were also responsible for maintenance of the milestones. And something else I guess I would share related to this is I have, here's a picture. Milestones existed before Franklin had that job. I think the earliest milestone is around 1707 up in the area of Boston. There are milestones everywhere. It's like milestone mania, not just in New York, but in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. So these were helpful markers for people for a lot of reasons, including kind of knowing where they were. No, there was no Google map, right, at the time. So if you entered from a side road or if you were traveling from Boston to New York, it was really, really helpful to and comforting, I know, to come upon these markers. And so they were helpful to charge as the stagecoaches developed their work too, to know how much to charge. The stagecoach drivers actually knew the mileage, but this was kind of evidence to the people so that there wasn't so much of an argument about what they were charging. So Franklin would definitely have been interested in the milestones and would have used the milestones as part of the postal system. But we believe that he would not have been responsible individually for placing any of the milestones in our area. There's possibly a couple on the Boston Post Road that there may be some evidence for, but that's at least where we are right now. And we would love to see some evidence, primary source evidence, that would say that he did, because that would be very exciting for us.
I mean, some more circumstantial evidence, Char, is the Franklin was quite aged at that point. He was getting quite old, and he was also living a great deal of his time in that decade when we think the milestones were installed. He was in England quite a bit of that period, so it might have been virtually impossible for him to be at least involved in person when these milestones were going in. Just a little footnote to what Char has said so well.
I'll also add, just because there were some other questions about, okay, so like who made these milestones, right? And I did tell you there's some suggestion that John Zerker in our local area, who was one of the two master gravestone carvers in the Old Dutch Church burying ground, was contracted with to carve some of the local milestones. But you will find as you travel through Putnam County, through Dutchess County, as you go down into New York City and you see some of the milestones, the stone material changes. So the fact that we, around the circa of the milestones in our area being carved and put in place, same time you'll see some of the old gravestones, the old Dutch church burying ground. The red sandstone quarry that was used was over in New Jersey, is the evidence that I have read. There may have been others as well, but this was a local stone that didn't have to be hauled too far. So if you go up north, you're going to see some that are made of different stone because that was the local stone that was in that area. So,
Char, we have another person who raised their hand. I think it's Sarah.
oh yeah, please do.
Sarah, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, my question was about the beautiful milestone that's visible in the park in Ossining. And
Yeah.
how does that relate to, I know I'm going out of territory here, but how does that relate to what you've been talking about?
That's a good question.
Henry, you want to go ahead and start and I'll pull it up, the picture of it?
Yeah, that milestone is located in Nelson Park. And again, it's a milestone on the west side of the road. It is, and it's tantalizing. It's a tantalizing milestone for us because here we want to be able to place these stones. But so, and we are missing a milestone 35, which we compute should be at the intersection of the Post Road and the north branch of the Revolutionary Road, which is very close to where this milestone sits. However, we can't make out for sure what that number is on the milestone. That could be a milestone. What did we speculate, Char? I think it's either it's a 35 or a 30.
And so look at this. This is a really bad shot, but it's taken at an angle in certain light. And if you are into looking at milestones or even the gravestones, right? Like the time of day that you're there makes a big difference. I don't know. To me, that's a 30, but there are others, people I really respect that see a 35, like with a big circle below the 5 here. But there would be no milestone, as Henry said, at this location. So I think I have the maps here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So this map, if you see the 34 here, this is near where today the Scarborough Church is. As Henry talked about, as we're moving up north, heading toward Ossining. And it's in this area that we get into our belief that the Albany Post Road did not divert to go down Revolutionary Road. So you can see here, this is the Cullis map, by the way, from 1789. Here's Cullis's symbol for a church. There's primary source evidence that this is near where the burying ground is, at the entrance to Sparta, where the Leatherman is buried, and that gravestone that the vulture hit with a cannonball and was destroyed was in this very famous and historic burying ground here. And it would show in the Cullis map that there was a church on the left side of the road, the west side, I should say, as we're heading north here, right? But you see the road goes straight by that church. This is the Erskine map. Here is, again, where Scarborough is, Scarborough Church today. Do you see the meeting house there? Erskine indicating that that was a religious meeting house, another church there. And then if you take a look here, It's a slightly clearer map. It's another version of the Erskine map, but it shows definitely the Albany Post Road going straight here through. This is a symbol, a commanding height symbol. It's what Erskine used to indicate a hill. And it shows the Albany Post Road going right through that hill. Importantly here, now I'm on the 1810 map, if you look here, you can actually see the outline of where the Hudson River is. And you can see on this particular map that the Albany Post Road doesn't divert down. Instead, it kind of goes straight. And this road here, where would be what is today Revolutionary Road, rejoining the Albany Post Road as we head up north to Ossining, everything points to us as we measure that the milestone would have been here. This would have been the 35th milestone. So is the 35th milestone the one that got picked up and put in what is today's Nelson Park? Maybe. But you know, the 30th milestone's missing too, right? The one thing we can say is that this milestone that's in Nelson Park is not a mile site. It is not a place we would anticipate a milestone to be. And also from the pictures, you can see it's pretty vulnerable. If we wanted to say which milestone I'm most worried about, it's that one. A car coming off the road could easily take it out, as has happened with so many of the other milestones. So we need to protect all of them, but this one in particular, I think, is our most physically vulnerable one.
Just a footnote on the church that you mentioned, Char.
Yeah.
When on one of the maps, we were talking about that meeting house. So that was a Presbyterian church that was burned during the Revolutionary War. And today, on the opposite side of Route 9, on the east side, is where Scarborough Presbyterian Church stands today. So basically, they were same denomination, but that the new church is on the east side of Route 9. The old church was on the west side of Route 9. And the maps are pretty clear as far as back in colonial times or near colonial times, what direction the Albany Post Road took. I don't know if there's some interval in the 19th century when it might have actually taken that turn down Revolutionary Road, but I haven't seen any map evidence of that. And I haven't seen any other evidence that would suggest that had happened.
I also want to say, I see here in the chat that Rick says he knows where 35 is. It's on Hawks Road. I think that, I could be wrong, Rick, and I want to look back in my notes. I'm pretty sure that 35 looks like it's from a different series than the one that we're talking about here. So I want to check, I want to say that carefully. I want to go back and check and see, but it may be the 35 that is a perfect match with the missing one here. If you've got a picture of it, or if you wanted to unmute yourself and give us more information on it, that would be amazing. But I'm pretty sure that we looked at that and concluded it was not this particular 35, but we'd love to be wrong because we want to find these missing milestones. And there have been a lot of rumors. People will tell us, oh, I saw a milestone when I was walking on the aqueduct. And Henry and I have gone back and forth and back and forth. We haven't found the milestones that we'd love to come across any of them that can be filled in. So Rick, let's follow up. I dropped our emails into the beginning of the chat so you can reach out to us afterwards. And I do want to mention one thing, Kathy, that you saw, Kathy Sears, in the map I was using for Beekman Farm. I'm sorry, I'm going through these additional ones at the end and I'm going the wrong way. It does look like the word grave there, but it's grove. That was the area of trees. Even at this point in time, it was heavily wooded. That was Frederick Phillips, the Phillips family's private kind of forest there. So it's not grave, it's grove that's there.
Char, looks like Sarah might still have her hand up. I don't know if she had
yeah.
another question. So let me just, Sarah, if you want to unmute yourself again, if you have a further question, feel free.
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So Char, let's do maybe I don't know if you have a couple more questions you want to respond to there in the chat, and then we can kind of
Okay.
finish up in a few minutes, okay?
Okay, that sounds good. I do see that. Hi, Francisco. Francisco's here. And I know we met at the library in Peekskill, where he's a librarian, and he's asking about stories about the milestones in Croton, Cortland, or Peekskill. So our research didn't take us up that far north. We have some general knowledge of that. But I will tell you that there are milestones throughout Putnam and Dutchess County as well. If you email me, Francisco, and I'll send you something about that's pretty cool. I found about the milestone in Peekskill that was like mid 20th century. But we have been talking to the Department of Transportation about the importance of doing work to preserve the entire series of milestones along the Albany Post Road. So I know that many of you on this webinar are here because you love these milestones. And so we'll have some more information for you on that. And definitely we would like it to be a crowdsourced effort. And Susan, yes, in Yonkers, there are 2 milestones. We didn't go down that far, and I can send you the locations for them. Or Henry, do you know offhand where they are?
Not offhand. No.
Yeah. I'll send you those locations because you should see them. They're available there as well. So, yeah, I mean, Chet, do you want to, is there one last question?
Yeah, if there's one last question you want to pull out of the chat or the Q&A, and then maybe we can make that our last question, Char. Is there something that you've seen that's you want to respond to?
Well, there's a lot. There's a question about the milestone that's in the library, Robin, that you had in the White Plains Library. So I haven't seen it. I do know that there are a lot of milestones along the Boston Post Road, but as I mentioned and Henry mentioned, there are milestones everywhere. So some of these east-west paths have milestones too. So we could probably take a look at that and figure out at least what series it's from based upon where it's marking the miles from. So there's so much more work that needs to be done here. And it's clear that many of you know a lot about the milestones already. So I know Henry and I would love to continue the dialogue with you all as our research continues.
Char, I'm not sure, but it looks like Jeff Wilson raised his hand again, and so yep. I'm going to ask him to unmute. So Jeff, if you do have another question you want to unmute, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm sorry, one more question. You right after we started discussing Benjamin Franklin, you flashed some text on the screen.
Yeah.
And then you immediately went to a map, but I wanted to get that. Okay, yeah, there we are. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Just hold on to that a second, please.
If you email me, Jeff, I'd be happy. And I do have some of the sources here at the bottom of this. And again, it's a very knowledgeable person's view. It's one person's view, but I think, Henry and I have read a lot of Franklin's letters, and we have not found a mention of a milestone either. But I say that very carefully because, people like Dr. Laborie have spent their lifetime looking at this. So we would love to find some primary source evidence where Franklin really talks about the milestones. That would be a game changer.
Thank you.
If it's okay with you, I think I'm going to ask Veronica Wilson, Veronica Gedrich, to come back in for a moment and maybe just close out. So Veronica, if you could unmute yourself and turn your camera on, that would be great.
There I am. Folks, I just wanted you to know, because there were a few people who commented that they missed the beginning of the presentation. This one will be recorded and posted, I believe, on our website with Chet's technology. And you'll be able to view the whole presentation from start to finish. So with that, I just want to thank Char and Henry and the Historical Society of Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown for this fabulous, fabulous presentation. I'm in awe of all of your amazing research. And thank you all for joining us today.